I was recently catching up with a younger cousin of mine, one of those bright, sharp-eyed students who, seems to have an opinion on everything. We were just grabbing coffee and the topic of a recent campus protest came up, and within seconds he was off, delivering this perfectly polished, high-energy defense of his position. He used all the right buzzwords, cited the correct hashtags, and spoke with the kind of absolute certainty that only a 20-year-old can truly muster. His eyes were wide with this sort of moral hunger, a desperate need to be on the right side of history. To him, the world was a high-definition movie where the heroes and villains had already been cast, and his job was simply to cheer for his team as loudly as possible. But then I asked him a simple, quiet question. I just said, "What's the strongest argument the other side makes?" And the change. It was almost physical. That vibrant energy just evaporated. He didn't get angry, at least not at first, but he looked genuinely confused, as if I had asked him to explain the scent of the color blue. He started to stammer, not about the facts of the case, but about why even asking that was problematic. He told me that looking for nuance was harmful and that, silence is violence. And in that moment, he wasn't a student exploring ideas. He was a soldier guarding a perimeter. He had traded the messy, difficult work of thinking for the warm, safe blanket of an identity. It was a fascinating and deeply unsettling shift to witness. One moment, he was a free-thinking individual. The next, he was a mouthpiece for an algorithm he didn't even realize he was following. And it made me realize that for many today, political belief isn't about policy or principles anymore. It's about belonging. It's a litmus test where moderation is treated like a betrayal and curiosity is seen as a lack of conviction. We've entered an era where we don't just hold our opinions, we wear them like armor to protect us from the terrifying possibility that the world might be more complicated than the 30-second reel suggests. And this isn't just about one side of the aisle either. Whether it's the rigid moralism of modern left or the defensive grievances of the rising right, the structure of the trap is identical. We were living in a world designed to echo our certainties back to us, punishing anyone who dares to step out of the choir. So the core mission of this deep dive is to unpack the very structures that lead to this unsettling trade-off. We need to know why political belief has become less about patient study, curiosity, and policy, and more about instant belonging. Or critically, how this affects our individual ability to own our thoughts and make complex judgments.
It's such a powerful story because it really captures this profound psychological and sociological evolution that's happening. We're seeing political life move away from rational inquiry and, as you said, toward tribal affiliation and a kind of absolute moral certainty.
And it feels global.
It is. And to truly understand this global friction, we need, I think, three powerful lenses. So we're going to use psychological research to examine how our minds are being rewired by technology.
Right.
Then political philosophy to understand how institutions are, in a sense, inviting us to surrender our agency. And finally, sociological analysis to explore the global dimensions of this polarization.
That structural approach feels essential. Because this isn't just about, American politics or a few online squabbles. We're really looking at the digital, the institutional, and the global forces at play.
Exactly.
And using two massive, diverse democracies, the USA and India, as our central case studies seems like a really smart way to ground this.
I think it's the perfect comparison. It allows us to see that while the historical and cultural roots of the conflict might be, very divergent.
Completely different.
Completely. One is rooted in ideology, the other in these deep-seated identity factors like religion and caste. But the psychological outcomes and the technological accelerators pushing people toward tribalism, they are strikingly similar across the world.
Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with the wiring. If political engagement has really changed, it must be because the technology we use to engage has fundamentally changed. What does this mean for how a belief is actually, formed today?
So the primary shift, and this is really key, is what we're calling the algorithmic trap. It moves engagement away from what you could call rational inquiry to something more like algorithmic identity signaling. And this is really just a sophisticated way of saying that, especially among younger people, beliefs are now downloaded rather than developed through, reading, debate, and patient study.
Yeah, that makes the conversation with my cousin make perfect sense. He wasn't relying on some complex policy brief he'd read. He was relying on a curated set of approved slogans and aesthetics that signaled his belonging to the right group.
Precisely. The content itself is fragmented. It's a viral short video, it's a distilled infographic, a perfectly worded soundbite. And when this prepackaged content appears in a conversation, it's defended with intense passion. But It often lacks any depth of internal rational examination.
Because the source was a download, not an inquiry.
Exactly. The source was something that was handed to him, something that confirmed what he already felt.
So the immediate emotional satisfaction of signaling one's identity, it just replaces the slow, friction-filled, sometimes painful work of rational thought.
It's a system of ruthless efficiency. You have to remember, platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, they are not neutrality zones. They are not just empty spaces.
No, they're engineered environments.
They are absolutely engineered environments. Their recommendation systems are built to maximize one thing: engagement. And they achieve this by favoring content that's consistent with the user's existing preferences. This creates these algorithmic echo chambers.
Which means the exposure to challenging ideas isn't just incidental, right? It's not just that you happen to not see them.
No, not at all. It's actively and systemically reduced by the code itself. The algorithm is designed to protect you from things that might make you click away.
And this system capitalizes so beautifully on a fundamental human inclination we all share, which is confirmation bias.
Absolutely. It's our tendency to favor information that supports what we already think and to actively ignore or, minimize anything that contradicts us.
We all do it.
We all do it. It's a cognitive shortcut. But what social media does is it removes the labor of filtering. The algorithm does it for you automatically and invisibly.
And when the algorithm filters out that contradictory information, it minimizes something that's absolutely critical to intellectual growth: cognitive dissonance.
Yes. That uncomfortable feeling you get when you encounter two or more conflicting ideas that challenge your worldview. That mental static.
We hate that feeling.
We do. But normally, resolving cognitive dissonance is how we learn. It's how we evolve our thinking. But here, the avoidance of challenging perspectives becomes an automated, frictionless process. The user is placed in a belief-safe environment.
A safe space for your ideas.
Precisely. And this environment leads directly to what psychologists call cognitive rigidity, which is simply the reduced ability to revise your beliefs even when you're facing compelling new information. Why? Because the system ensured you rarely face that new information in the first place.
That sounds like an incredibly powerful trap. But let's talk about the neurological side of this. Why is this automated confirmation so sticky? Why does it feel so good?
This is where brain chemistry enters the picture in a big way. When you view confirming information, that perfect post, that satisfying comment, the high praise consensus in the comment section.
That feeling of, yes, everyone agrees with me.
Exactly that feeling. It triggers the brain's reward systems. Specifically, the ventral striatum releases dopamine. And that positive chemical release reinforces the behavior.
And dopamine is a powerful teacher. It strengthens the pathway. It tells your brain, conformity equals reward. Do this again.
That's it. It makes continued ideological conformity emotionally satisfying, and frankly, it can become addictive. This neurological entrenchment means that when a person is suddenly asked to do the hard work of thinking critically or considering the opponent's strong argument, as you asked your cousin to do, it feels genuinely threatening.
It's not just an intellectual challenge, it's an emotional one.
It's an emotional threat. It breaks the reward cycle and replaces it with the very cognitive friction they have been neurologically conditioned to avoid.
Let's connect this mechanism to a human experience. I remember reading about a university student, Leo, I think his name was. How did this algorithmic trap manifest in his life?
Yes. Leo's story is a textbook case of what sociologists like Durkheim would call anomie. This feeling of being utterly lost and disconnected despite being constantly engaged online.
So he's connected, but he's lost.
Paradoxically, yes. Leo used to spend hours reading complex political philosophy, really digging into things. But he slowly found himself addicted to checking his feed for the trending slogans, the mandatory hashtags of the day. And when he tried to form an original, nuanced opinion, he just felt disconnected and anxious.
So he felt lost because he wasn't thinking for himself anymore. That's fascinating.
He described it beautifully. He said he no longer felt like he formed opinions. He merely downloaded the pre-vetted ones. The risk of social exile, of being criticized or, canceled by his digital hive mind for disagreeing, it just became too high a personal cost.
So he made a trade.
He chose the safe blanket of identity validation over the difficult, isolating work of self-possession. His independent thought was sacrificed for the noise of the crowd.
That exchange, trading the difficult work of self-possession for the instant validation of the crowd, that feels like the core mechanism of modern polarization.
And this mechanism is particularly effective because of when it hits people. It strikes so hard during adolescence, which is a period of heightened developmental vulnerability.
Okay, tell us more about that developmental window. Why are adolescents, specifically, uniquely susceptible to these digital traps?
Well, they're navigating a critical life stage. We can rely on Erik Erikson's framework here, the identity versus role confusion phase. Adolescents are driven by this urgent, almost existential need to find consistency in their self-image.
Good, am I?
That's the question. And they desperately need peer validation to confirm who they are. Online platforms provide instantly quantifiable, highly visible metrics for that. Validation, likes, views, followers, comments. The need for external approval is just intensely amplified by the platforms.
And this isn't just a psychological phase, right? There's a strong neurocognitive factor at play here.
Absolutely. The adolescent brain architecture is a crucial piece of the puzzle. The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for critical thinking, impulse control, long-term planning.
The CEO of the brain.
The CEO, exactly. It's still maturing, it's under construction, but simultaneously, the limbic system, which governs emotional responsiveness and the search for reward, that's highly active. It's firing on all cylinders.
So their brains are biologically wired to prioritize the immediate emotional gratification of that reward loop over the difficult long-term work of critical analysis.
Precisely. This biological disparity makes them exceptionally sensitive to social feedback. They are prone to returning to emotionally charged, reinforcing algorithmic content because they are literally more responsive to those digital validation cues. The desire to belong often triumphs over analytical reasoning simply because the emotional feedback is quicker and louder than the rational output.
And this feeds directly into something called social identity theory. If I gain my self-esteem from belonging to a group and the algorithm shows me the perfect group, I am heavily incentivized to conform.
That's the engine right there. Social identity theory shows that people gain self-esteem through in-group membership. This fosters favoritism toward their own group and, crucially, antagonism toward the out-group.
It's not just about liking your team, it's about disliking the other team.
Yes, the out-group becomes part of the definition of the in-group. And algorithmic grouping creates these closed digital communities where strict conformity, posting the right meme, using the right language, affirming the party line is rewarded instantly.
So if everyone in that tightly curated digital space holds the same increasingly extreme view, we get rapid group polarization.
That's the inevitability of the echo chamber. Constant exposure to homogeneous opinions pushes the group's position toward the extreme edges. And the platform design accelerates this because highly provocative or emotionally charged content, the extreme stuff, is often prioritized by the algorithm for higher ranking and greater engagement.
It gets more flicks.
It gets more clicks, more shares, more comments. And for the young person caught in this cycle, it rapidly internalizes disagreement, transforming it from a mere intellectual difference into a severe form of social betrayal. The digital structure doesn't just reflect division, it molds behavior to enhance it.
This constant psychological drive for belonging is transforming political ideology itself, and not just for young people, but globally. It feels like it has stopped being about coherent policy platforms and has become a psychological container and identity.
That's an excellent way to put it. Political ideology has become the primary psychological identity for many, substituting for traditional institutions like, local community, family, or faith.
Which are all weakening in many places.
They are. And ideology is filling that void. It satisfies these deep emotional needs for certainty, for security, and for belonging in a modern world that often feels fragmented and chaotic. The alignment is emotional and tribal, rather than rational or philosophical. And that's why you see people holding these complex, sometimes contradictory ideological positions. The consistency they're seeking is emotional and social, not logical.
And we see this phenomenon eroding shared civil spaces everywhere. I was reading the account of Rohan, a software developer in Bangalore. His experience shows just how quickly politics moves from a policy discussion to this kind of tribal allegiance, flattening all that rich cultural nuance.
Rohan's anecdote is sadly common across global democracies, including India. For him and his peer group, their political affiliation became their single defining characteristic. It just swallowed everything else. And this replaced the traditional civil spaces, the neighborhood square, the community group, where people could meet as neighbors or colleagues or friends first, and partisans second.
Right. And for him, the moment someone, even a family member, posts something that doesn't meet the group's ideological purity test.
The relationship is instantly severed. It's that quick. The cost of this immediate algorithmic belonging is the erosion of actual human relationships and the loss of genuine cultural pluralism. The universal trap here is intolerance, rooted in this tendency to moralize one's own cause.
And it's so crucial to state, as the sources all point out, that this rigid intolerance isn't exclusive to one side of the political aisle. This is not a left or right problem.
Not at all. Researchers have convincingly demonstrated that authoritarian tendencies, things like aggression toward dissenters and intolerance of ambiguity, they exist across the political spectrum with equal intensity. The language and the specific grievances differ, of course. It might be progressive moralism demanding absolute conformity on one side, or defensive grievances against perceived cultural threats on the other. But the psychological structure of the certainty, the rejection of nuance, and the punishment of divergence is fundamentally identical. The digital environment is just the perfect, self-reinforcing feedback loop to nurture this cognitive rigidity on a global scale.
So if technology is one half of the story, actively shaping how we think by capitalizing on our psychological vulnerabilities, then the institutional environment is the other half, shaping what we think we're allowed to be. And this is where the critique of the modern state comes in. Okay, so we're moving from dopamine hits and TikTok to political philosophy, which is a major jump. We need to bridge this individual surrender of agency that we just talked about to the institutional invitation to surrender it. How does the managerial state relate to that psychological vulnerability we just discussed?
The connection is that both structures invite the individual to be less than fully competent. The critique of the managerial state is essential here. And just to define it, this is a regime that, irrespective of the political party holding power, steadily replaces traditional law with vast, sprawling administrative decree.
Right.
It replaces the concept of limited government, a state restrained by constitutional boundaries, with an unlimited state that constantly seeks new reasons to expand its oversight and control into every corner of life.
And it often justifies this expansion in the name of these very noble, abstract goals, like achieving perfect equality or providing absolute safety.
Precisely. But a specific and arguably more insidious variation of this is what some critics call the therapeutic managerial state. And they describe this as functioning like a secular theocracy.
A secular theocracy. What does that mean in practice?
It means it relies heavily on social engineering and a kind of moral sanctimony. So instead of addressing difficult personal behaviors like chronic debt, drug use, or problematic gambling as moral choices requiring individual discipline, it reframes them entirely in medical or therapeutic terms.
So instead of saying you are making a poor choice, the state says you are suffering from an addiction, an illness, or a disorder.
That's the key rhetorical move. By defining behaviors as an illness, the state conveniently removes individual agency and responsibility. If you're a victim of a disorder, well, you're not competent to manage yourself. Therefore, the state must step in as the expert, the caretaker, or the parent, the therapeutic savior.
This approach signals a fundamental disdain for the individual's capacity for self-mastery. It is a denial of competence.
A profound denial of competence. And we see this institutional capture extend beyond government bureaucracy and into traditional private sector gatekeepers, like the media and academia.
Tell us about Clara's experience. She was at a legacy media institution, right?
Yes, and Clara's story is a vivid illustration of this institutional capture, where the pursuit of excellence is subsumed by the management of ideology. She was a respected researcher, and she noticed her institution shifting its focus over time. The priority moved away from intellectual rigor and objective excellence, the hallmarks of meritocracy, and instead centered on the emotional management of ideological sensitivities.
So instead of debating the facts of the research, the institution was debating the potential harm the facts might cause to a certain narrative.
Yes. The new focus was on achieving narrative safety. And this is the point where feelings and emotional outcomes become the final, highest arbiters of truth, and objective data is considered secondary to its potential ideological impact.
It's truth by committee based on feeling.
It is. And when institutions prioritize this kind of ideological conformity over intellectual rigor, the resulting erosion of public trust is inevitable. The pursuit of safety, ironically, compromises the institution's integrity itself.
So if the managerial state denies individuals the capacity for moral choice, it fundamentally undermines the pillars of a self-governing society. And we need to clearly define those pillars, this moral triad of liberty, individual responsibility, and dignity in practical, modern terms.
This triad is the foundation of what you might call a high-character society. Let's start with liberty. In this context, liberty is defined pretty narrowly. It's about private property rights, consent, and contract. And it's maintained by what is sometimes called a night watchman state.
A night watchman state. What exactly is that in today's terms? I think people hear that and imagine something from the 19th century.
Right, it sounds archaic, but it's really the classical liberal vision. A government whose function is protective and strictly limited. It's large enough to secure rights, so enforcing contracts, maintaining national defense, punishing violent crime, but it's small enough not to encroach on citizens' moral or economic freedom through excessive regulation or confiscatory taxation.
And what are some modern policies that encroach on that vision of liberty?
Well, you could point to things like excessive occupational licensing that prevents people from working in a chosen field without the state's permission, or drug prohibition that infringes on bodily autonomy, or taxation rates that fundamentally strip citizens of the fruits of their labor far beyond what is required for core protection.
Okay, so that's liberty. How do we define individual responsibility within that same structure?
Individual responsibility here is about government-administered accountability. It is the system that holds citizens to account for their choices and for their transgressions of others' rights. This includes punishing criminals reliably and enforcing restitution. It relies on what some call a thick-skinned tort doctrine, meaning you are held accountable for demonstrable harm you cause, not for every slight or emotional offense.
So individual responsibility is the external system of accountability that encourages personal responsibility or self-mastery.
Precisely. The system demands you be accountable for your actions, which in turn fosters the individual's internal striving to be reliable and trustworthy.
Now, let's talk about dignity, which seems to be the most abstract, but as you said, maybe the most vital pillar of the three.
It's the glue. Dignity is the core social quality that underpins the other two. And it involves two interlocking concepts. The first is guarding one's own self-respect.
What does that look like?
It means self-possession. It means affirming the inner captain, that integrative moral force that attempts to guide your life. It's the assertion that my story is mine and I am the author of my choices, good or bad.
That inner captain being the recognition that despite all the different impulses and voices we have inside us, there is a central moral force attempting to guide the ship.
And society must affirm the existence of that potential in every person. The second equally important aspect of dignity is accommodating the self-respect of others. This involves common decency and honoring the ethic of mind your own business. It means we presume others are conducting their lives as they see fit, and we refrain from judging, pitying, or patronizing their apparent weaknesses unless we are explicitly invited to help.
So, to summarize, liberty protects the sphere of external choice, responsibility enforces accountability for those choices, and dignity is the affirmation of the individual's internal self-mastery that makes the choice meaningful in the first place.
And that leads us right back to the corrosive mechanism of the managerial state. The nanny state's paternalist prohibitions are a direct affront to dignity. When the state steps in and says, we must regulate your choice, your savings, your diet, your helmet, because you are not competent to choose fully.
It is explicitly denying that inner captain. It's denying self-mastery.
It effectively invites the adult citizen to assume the psychological role of a child.
And that invitation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Absolutely. As one theorist argued, to manipulate men toward goals that you, the social engineer, see, but they do not, is to deny their human essence. It degrades them by treating them as objects without wills of their own. Paternalism declares the inner captain incompetent. And this is the tragic consequence. It compromises the citizen's dignity, which then causes them to lose the habit of personal responsibility.
This sounds like a system designed to eat away at its own foundations through a really destructive feedback loop. Can we break down that destructive feedback loop of low character using some concrete policy examples?
Absolutely. We have to look at the interdependence of indulgence and coercion. We know the political economy connection is pretty clear. Welfare benefits, which are an indulgence or departure from individual responsibility, must be paid for by confiscatory taxation, which is a form of coercion and an encroachment on liberty.
So indulgence inherently requires coercion.
It does. But let's look at the moral connection, where low dignity feeds coercion.
Give us a modern example.
Okay, look at public health policies. When societal dignity is low, meaning people are perceived as fundamentally incompetent and irresponsible, it motivates and legitimizes paternalism. This leads to coercion. Consider mandatory helmet laws for motorcyclists. If the state is financially responsible for paying the extensive doctor bills for a motorcyclist's fractured skull via public health care, the state gains a paternalistic justification to regulate the behavior. By accepting restricted individual responsibility, the state saying, "We will pay for your carelessness," the state gains permission to encroach on liberty. You must wear a helmet.
That's the public charge connection. If I am responsible for your costs, I gain a right to regulate your behavior.
Exactly. And we see a similar erosion in the justice system. The diminishment of dignity erodes individual responsibility. When you have lawyers invoking disorders, syndromes, or mental illnesses to argue that an offender is not fully human, but merely a victim of circumstance,
they're treating that person as an incompetent, someone who needs correction or therapy, not punishment.
and this denial of accountability treats the offender not as a rational moral agent who has violated the civil order, but as a moral invalid.
And this denial demeans everyone involved.
It does. It demeans the offender by removing their moral agency. And it demeans the innocent, as we are told. Pardoning the bad is injuring the good. The self-reliant citizen who takes pride in personal discipline loses that pride when they see the irresponsible indulge without consequence.
And this indulgence, particularly in the form of certain kinds of welfare benefits, can lead to the ethic of entitlement.
The entitlement ethic arises because these benefits are often dispensed anonymously. There is no voluntary contribution required, and often no gratitude is expected. The faceless state provides the benefits regardless of behavior or merit. This relationship signifies a moral emptiness. It places the recipient in the humiliating role of a supplicant to the state, and it places the self-reliant person in the role of a seeker who is penalized for their hard work.
So the core fragility of this triad, liberty, dignity, and responsibility, is that a shock leading to decreased responsibility, say a new universal safety net, can trigger a recursive slide across all three pillars.
It is a devastating, cascading failure. If diminished responsibility is established, perhaps through widespread entitlement programs, it causes lower societal dignity. When citizens are treated as incompetent, they often start to act incompetently. Lower dignity, in turn, causes further diminished liberty and responsibility, trapping the system in low values across all three dimensions.
So we're underestimating the danger.
We grossly underestimate the hazards of coercion if we ignore this multiplier effect working through the moral dimension of dignity. The political struggle we are witnessing is, therefore, fundamentally a moral struggle to affirm individual self-mastery.
That analysis gives us a powerful philosophical framework. So we've seen how technology shapes psychological identity and how institutions can erode moral agency. Now let's see how these forces manifest in two very different global settings, the USA and India. So the polarization we're discussing isn't an isolated phenomena. It is truly global, and we see it in democracies all over the world. How do we define this universal political polarization?
Well, it's consistently defined by a few key things. Citizens exhibiting clashing ideologies, consistent and profound disagreement, and, most critically, deep animosity toward their opponents. It fosters the sustained, divisive us versus them narrative that really strains the foundations of self-governance.
And what are the concrete consequences for a country when this kind of polarization takes hold? What does it actually do?
The consequences are severe. It fuels internal conflict, often leading to the dehumanization of opponents, which fundamentally tears at social cohesion. In government, it causes legislative gridlock, making crucial policymaking almost impossible.
Nothing gets done.
Nothing gets done. And furthermore, it deeply compromises the neutrality of administrative bureaucracies as public servants' commitment to specific political ideologies begins to affect their decision-making. Overall, it just erodes public trust in the very institutions meant to serve everyone impartially.
Okay, so while the phenomenon is global, the underlying historical drivers are completely divergent between India and the USA. Let's start with India's focus. What's the primary driver there?
India's polarization primarily hinges on these very deep-seated religious, ethnic, caste, and regional lines. The historical roots are vast. You have British colonization, the subsequent India-Pakistan partition driven by religious identity, and centuries of caste-based discrimination, All of this is crucial context.
And that diversity, which is one of India's greatest strengths, can also become a flashpoint when it's weaponized politically.
Absolutely. India is a land of immense linguistic, religious, and cultural diversity. We're talking multitudes of languages, states, and tribal communities. This complexity often gives rise to religious and regional polarization, and it's been intensified by the ascent of majoritarianism, where political parties appeal aggressively to the largest ethnic or religious groups.
Which inevitably fosters animosity toward minority communities.
Inevitably. And this is all compounded by active secessionist movements in regions like Kashmir and Khalistan, where identity politics is truly existential.
Now compare that to the USA, where the polarization seems to center more around ideology than explicit ethnicity or religion, at least on the surface.
That's right. The USA's polarization revolves predominantly around ideology and party affiliation, the clash between conservatives and liberals. While the nation has deep historical identity conflicts, especially regarding race, the dramatic contemporary increase in animosity really dates back to the ideological and cultural divides that crystallized after the 1970s.
And those fault lines being issues like climate change policy, gun rights, abortion access, and all these evolving social norms.
Precisely. These are the issues where ideological polarization mirrors party affiliation so closely that the distinction between Democrat and Republican has become less about local interest and more about a deeply entrenched, comprehensive worldview. And this intense ideological separation hinders compromise and makes bipartisan cooperation an anomaly.
The structures of their political systems and media environments also seem to accentuate these differences. What's the key difference in their party structures?
It's huge. India operates a multi-party system with numerous regional and national parties representing diverse specific interests. This necessitates coalition building and negotiation, though it can still lead to a lot of volatility.
Whereas the USA?
The USA, conversely, maintains a rigidly entrenched two-party system. This structure forces all these diverse internal ideological factions into one of two distinct, highly polarized platforms, which only enhances the binary us versus them nature of the conflict.
And the media landscape, which we know is the accelerator for polarization in both places, manifests differently too.
Very differently. In the USA, media polarization is dominated by major cable news networks that have strong, clear partisan biases. They are constantly reinforcing existing beliefs and often disseminating information curated for a specific ideological filter.
And in India?
In India, the media polarization is influenced heavily by the nation's linguistic and regional diversity. Sensationalism and biased reporting exacerbate societal divisions, but it plays out across many different language groups and regional media outlets, which fragments the national narrative even further.
And yet, despite all these structural differences, multi-party versus two-party, identity-based versus ideological, they share one massive common amplifier: populism.
Populism is a common rhetorical strategy in both nations, absolutely. Leaders who adopt populist rhetoric capitalize on these profound socioeconomic grievances and cultural anxieties. And this political approach intensifies the divide by simplifying complex problems and painting clear, often highly moralized, us versus them pictures.
Which directly feeds into that tribal belonging we discussed in part 1.
It's the same psychological mechanism.
Okay, finally, let's look at the socioeconomic dimensions driving polarization in both countries. How does economic inequality manifest as political division in India?
In India, socioeconomic disparities driven by extreme income inequality are deeply intertwined with historical structures like caste and regional development. Caste-based discrimination and the religious divide, especially the Muslim-Hindu divide, which are rooted in colonial history and the partition, are prominent, enduring drivers. Polarization often flares where regional and class disparities intersect with these ancient identity fault lines.
And in the USA, the socioeconomic dimensions are framed differently.
Yes. In the U.S., polarization contends heavily with educational disparities. You have college-educated liberals versus non-college-educated conservatives, and these pronounced urban-rural divides.
The map is a sea of red with blue dots.
Exactly. And there's also the accelerating problem of geographic clustering, where like-minded individuals increasingly move to live near each other. This physical isolation heightens ideological separation at the local level and makes encountering different viewpoints a rare occurrence in daily life, reinforcing the algorithmic echo chamber in a physical space.
So the distinct nature and drivers of polarization in each country underscore the necessity for context-specific strategies. But the ultimate result, deepening animosity, distrust, and legislative gridlock, is a profound, shared challenge for global democracy. We have completed a difficult and detailed journey. We've seen this complex system where technological design amplifies psychological needs, trapping individuals in these cycles of conformation and rigid belief. And at the same time, institutional changes, driven by the managerial state, erode the moral pillars of self-mastery, liberty, responsibility, and dignity by constantly treating the citizen as incompetent.
That synthesis is crucial because it highlights the central struggle for agency. Both the structure of the managerial state and the design of the algorithms are constantly extending the same invitation. And that invitation is for the individual to surrender their dignity, to outsource their critical thinking, and to play the role of the child or the victim who is not truly responsible for their own being.
It's an invitation to hand over the reins, to let someone else be the captain of your soul.
And so the necessary response then is to practice a kind of radical self-possession. It's about actively affirming that inner captain, that integrative moral force that attempts to guide the ship of selves, that judges worthiness, and that gives meaning to the individual journey.
It's an internal act of defiance.
It is. It means actively resisting the external pressure to conform, even when it means enduring inner conflict and consciously choosing intellectual discomfort over the easy, dopamine-fueled path of certainty.
So if the entire environment, digital and institutional, is rewarding ideological conformity and punishing intellectual difference, what is the most vital, actionable value for us to reclaim in this highly charged era?
I think the most vital value is the courage to inquire, to examine, and to sit with complexity. This is a practice, not a belief. It requires reestablishing our civic spaces, whether that's your classroom, your professional life, or your own dinner table, not as arenas for ideological purity, but as places where intellectual discomfort is explicitly permitted and welcomed.
And that means treating disagreement differently.
We must treat disagreement not as a threat to be purged, but as an essential condition for moral and intellectual growth.
That feels like the path back to agency, moving from these downloaded, rigid scripts to self-authored, nuanced conviction.
Because true conviction, the kind that can actually withstand the test of opposition and nuance, must be the product of deep, informed reflection, not automatic allegiance to inherited scripts or algorithmic agendas. In a world where politics has been reduced to performance, tribal signaling, and posturing, the act of genuine critical inquiry is the most potent and necessary form of intellectual and moral resistance.